Hello, and welcome back to the HIPAA Insider Show, where we make HIPAA compliance accessible for everyone, and not just the big players in the industry. I'm your host, Adam Zenedine, and I'm joined, as always, by the CTO and founder of HIPAA Vault, Gil Vidals. Hey, Gil.
Hey, Adam. Looking forward to today's vlog here.
Yeah, I am too. Today we're tackling a crucial topic, which is in the area of cybersecurity, and it's phishing. Specifically, we're talking about how to examine a link before you click it. Gil, give us some of the basics when it comes to the problem with links, and maybe describe phishing for us.
Yeah, that's a good one. The phishing is it's a term that is used, was spelled with the PH instead of an F, for those of you that haven't really heard about it. But this concept of phishing has been around now for several years. And I can still remember when it was a new concept. It hasn't been that long ago. And I remember thinking, what is this phishing thing? Well, what's happening is that, like when you go fishing and you throw your bait in the pond and hope to catch a fish, similar to this, the cyber criminals are throwing out information through social engineering. They're trying to get somebody to click on a link, typically. So that doesn't always have to be a link, but that's typically what you see. It's an email, you get the email, and it might say, hey, your bank needs to get a hold of you. It's very important. Somebody just sent you $50,000, and if you want the money, you got to click this link. So you're very tempting. You click the link, and then you've now infected your Windows machine with the virus, and now it's, or worse yet, you might type in your bank account information, your social security, your birthday, you hit submit, and now the bad guys have your information. So that's what phishing is all about, and it's really the number one way of these hackers getting access to information. They really, really are good at these phishing techniques, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Why is it such a big deal in healthcare?
Well, in healthcare, it's a big deal because once a person, an employee, has been phished successfully, then the data breach potential is there. So in other words, the person who exposed their information or clicked on a link, now from that, say that employee works from home and they have access to the hospital patient records, well then now that Windows machine that's been infected, they can access the patient records the same way that user may be accessing them when they're working during the day. And of course, data breaches are terrible because you have to pay a fine and pay for credit monitoring and so on. It also affects the reputation of the organization that was compromised, and then there could be financial losses. It could lead to a ransomware attack. So it really can escalate quickly, Adam.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the reputational damage can be devastating in healthcare, as you said, because the employee that's working in healthcare versus any other industry has typically more access to personal information just by the nature of the job and solving the problem. So yeah, okay, well, how can our listeners spot these phishing attempts? And what are some red flags to look out for when examining a link?
Well, what I like to do when I get an email, I like to examine the email. So the number one thing to do is when an email comes into your box, the number one question to ask yourself is, did I initiate this communication? So in the example I gave earlier, where the bank said to me, hey, you got $50,000, your lucky day, click here, add your information. I asked myself the question, did I initiate that communication? Did I ask the bank if I just got a $50,000 transaction and they're responding to me saying, yes, you got it? Then it's safe. But if I never initiated that, then it's very suspicious just from that thought.
Yeah.
Now, the second thing I like to do is I hover over the link. So the email comes in, I hover over the logo of the bank, I can see the URL, I can see the link they want me to click on. I just hover over, I don't click, I just hover over it, and then it pops up, it'll say something long web address, but the domain part, it might say something like, what could be something like bank.gr, bank.ur, where some weird, it's not .com, it's not .net, it's not .org, it's some dot something I never heard of in my life. And I'm like, what is that? That's a very weird and abnormal, or not abnormal, but unusual, very rare domain name. And I think that right there is a big red flag. And sometimes the domain names, they include stupid things that even the hacker didn't pay attention. They put things like, hack 100 or something. You're like, what? Hack 100? And they're doing, they're in a rush. They're doing a job just like everyone else. That's their job to hack you. And they're careless. They make stupid mistakes in the URL. So I like to look at that, but those are the things that I look for when it's an email that is asking you to click on the link. I always ask myself that question, and I always look at the source of the link.
Okay, so suspicious senders. What else comes up when you're reviewing an email that you weren't expecting?
Yeah, if the phisher is trying to create panic, that's usually a sign that there's something going on. And by panic, I mean, they may say to you, if you don't respond within an hour, your bank account will be closed, or your son who's in college, they may know that your son's in college in Vermont. And your son is in college in Vermont, he's in the medical facility, he needs $10,000 to get a procedure done, he fell. And you're like, huh, what is this? So, people get desperate. They send the $10,000 to Vermont. They try to call their son. He doesn't answer the cell phone. They freak out and they send the money. So anything that seems like it's urgent like that, that's a technique they use to get on your emotional side, the weak side. So that's usually a big red flag, that something is really wrong here.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that the hackers send millions of these emails out, right? So all they need is one or two to get caught, and they're in for a payday. So what you might think, well, no one would really do this. I mean, what kind of business is it? But really, it's just a numbers game for them, and all they need is one person to accept it. Okay, they want you to act impulsively. So what other flags are there that it's not really what it's supposed to be, or what it says it is in the email?
Yeah, that's a good question. I did want to add one more thing. It's very interesting that the hackers, when they have your data that they bought from somebody or they hack to get the data, they may have a lot of information just to stage the email. For example, they may know that you have a daughter, Jill, and a son, Joe. And so they might say, hey, Joe, who's at the University of Vermont, fell, and Jill, his sister, let us know. And so you're like, oh my gosh, this must be, they know my family, they know who I am, this must be legitimate, because how else would they know all this information? Well, they stole that information to begin with to stage this email. The email's well crafted. So keep that in mind, that just because they have particular information about your life and your relationships, that doesn't mean that it's legitimate. The other thing is that a lot of times they'll use generic greetings, like you might say, hello, Mr. Customer, or hello, whom it may concern, to whom it may concern. Usually, now that's a weak indicator, but it's still an indicator, right? If it's a generic one, most emails from companies now will have your name in there. It'll say, dear Bob, So I wouldn't consider that a strong indicator, but you're trying to look at the whole picture. You're trying to look at everything together, and I think that's something else to be aware of.
Yeah, and also not to forget the misspellings and poor grammar that often come up, whether intentionally or misspellings in the email or domain, just because they couldn't register the correct domain name, so they registered one that looks very similar to it. Phishing emails often contain those kind of typos. Although typos in the body of the email now, with the advent of AI, I think are probably going to be less and less, because more and more hackers are going to be using AI to generate these messages.
I think, yeah, I was going to say sometimes there's a mismatch in the displayed link and the actual link. So they may show you the link, like a blue link, with the letters in there, ups.com/track my package. So that looks very innocent to you. You're like, oh, I see that. I can see it right in the email. It says ups.com track my package. But then when you hover over it, you notice that the URL, the domain is .cn, a Chinese URL. In other words, a URL related to a Chinese domain or some other weird domain. And you're like, oh, they're trying to fool me here. The link that they're showing in the text doesn't match the link that actually would be the one I'd be going to. So that's like a smoke and mirrors type of scenario. So be careful when you look at the link visually. Make sure that you've actually hovered over it, because that's really going to reveal what you're actually going to click on.
Okay, yeah, let's drill down a little bit into that. And there's also tools that people use, such as Bitly, to shorten URLs in general, so it gets a little bit more complex. At this stage, if you're watching us on YouTube, then there's going to be some additional visuals I'm pulling up on the screen. If you're listening by podcast, try and follow along or switch over to YouTube. But either way, give us a like and subscribe. So Gil, I've got here a useful tool that can be used to examine the links. Have I jumped the gun here a little bit, or should we just dive into the unshorten it tool?
No, that's good. You're fine.
Okay, yeah. So it's unshorten it, and the website is unshorten.it. And so what you can do is, if you have like a Bitly link that's a shortened link, you can paste it into here and it'll tell you what the original link is. So these tools reveal the full URL. What can you then glean from the full URL, Gil? What's useful there?
Well, when you look at the full URL, first of all, after you have unshortened it, in other words, it's not an abbreviation anymore, it's the actual link. That if they're hiding something and they don't want you to see the actual link you're going to go to, then it's going to reveal where you would go to if you were to click on the link. So you're able to see it, and it might be something that you recognize as being very strange, because you're looking for something that's an anomaly, not necessarily malicious. So again, if you find a URL that ends in something you don't recognize, and what would you recognize if you're not a technician, you're not a cloud engineer? What I mean by that is you should recognize .com, .net, .org. Those are pretty common, but if you get anything else, it just raises a flag.
Country related, maybe .ru, something like that.
Yeah, something like .ru or .cn for China or these other countries. Now, with AI, you could just simply put the actual URL after you unshorten it into AI and ask, hey, tell me about this domain here. And it could tell you what country it's from. And if you see something that's from another country and the email looks like it's from a U.S. facility or a U.S. organization, that should be a red flag. It's like, why would they be sending me to a foreign country, or why would they be using a foreign type of domain? So these are all, again, everything is a flag. There's nothing here that's a perfect silver bullet. You're just trying to examine the whole email and get a score in your mind by looking at all these things and deciding, is this really malicious? But of course, don't click on it. I can't repeat that too many times, right? You never want to click on these unless you're 100% certain it's safe. But this is kind of like a Curious George situation. If you've already determined you're not going to click this and open it, there's no reason for you to sit here and examine it. You're not trying to be a detective, but sometimes you're not sure. You're like, maybe this is important, so you do want to go a step further and go, well, I do want to examine this because I'm not quite certain of the nature of this email, and I want to investigate a little bit further without damaging my computer, without spending a lot of time. These little tools these techniques we're giving you are very easy and quick to use. So within 2 or 3 minutes, you could start to narrow down whether this is a safe or malicious link.
Yeah, and in the IT department, they could be useful as well, because you could say, okay, well, I know this is a scam. Let me find what the website is, and then I will blacklist it from my company firewall so that employees can't open it, even if they do get tricked. So yeah, it's useful there. Okay, so website reputation. How do you check the overall safety of a website? We've got 2 tools that we're going to run through. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so here's Google Transparency Report. Yeah, so the Transparency Report's a useful tool that I've used myself, so we can just do a quick test here. Again, hopefully our website, hipvault.com, doesn't show any red flags, but we'll give it a go. We're doing it live. All right, no unsafe content found. So we're our website shows up as healthy and reputable, but this is a useful tool to just check and see if there's. It's obviously basing the reputation on reports of scams that have been made elsewhere, so it keeps a database in play, and it's very useful for that. And then the second one is Virus Total, which has a feature, a similar feature, but it provides a little bit more, or quite a lot more information. So if I put in HIPAA.com into it, it'll say community score out of 97 security vendors, and it shows no security vendors flagged this URL as malicious, and then it shows you who the security vendors are. It also shows you ones that haven't, commented on it as well. So yeah, this is probably for the more geeky IT security professionals, but I like the additional data that it gives, and it also allows you to upload a file. So if the email contains an attachment rather than a link, you can upload the file here, and it will give you a virus scan and let you know if there's any viruses on there. Gil, it's always important to, we started with where you expect in the email, and does the email seem like a scam? If it does, then you're probably not even going to get to this stage. This is really at the later stages. And even then, if you're still not sure after you run all this, then just err on the side of. Okay, so beyond examining individual links, Gil, what are some of the overall best practices to protect yourself and your organization from phishing?
Well, they say that practice makes perfect. So it's recommended that you have employee training, and the employee training is actual training. It's not just reading some module and saying, okay, I took the module. It's actually launching a benign phishing attempt. You can sign up for services where they'll send your employees a phishing-like email. In other words, it is a phishing email, but it doesn't. When you click the link, it's not going to do anything bad. And so you can test that, and it'll report back to the manager saying, "Hey, of your employees, these 2 employees, they actually fell for it and they clicked on the link." And then usually what happens with these tools is that it offers more training on the spot. Right after clicking that link, it says, "Hey, Joe or Jill, you need to have more training." So that's something that you can do. And then the other one is multi-factor authentication. It's always good to make sure you turn on all your multi-factor authentication across all of your apps that you have, including your email and all your vendors that offer your services that you log into every day. Make sure those have 2-factor authentication enabled. So those are a couple of good ones, low-hanging fruit for you.
Okay. Yeah, and I think we drill down on multi-factor authentication. So if the let's call them, if the victim of phishing receives an email, clicks on the link, and the link, let's say, requests that they sign in to their Microsoft or Google account, and they sign in, they put in their email address, their password, the hacker then has their email address and password, but if multi-factor is enabled, they don't have that one-time code. And even if they had the one-time code, it only lasts for 20 seconds or whatever it is. So they wouldn't be able to access it after that. So that's where I think multi-factor is really important there. What about HIPAA compliance and email filtering?
Well, email filtering is important to have enabled. So a lot of people use Outlook and Gmail. Those have settings where you can ensure that you handle the inbound email, that you have the filtering set up properly for security. I like Google in particular. They seem to have a lot of filtering that's just built in. Like I don't have to click any buttons. It's just it gives me good warnings if it suspects an email to be malicious.
Yeah.
But not everybody uses Google. Not everybody uses Outlook. So whatever vendor you use for your email, make sure that you've enabled the email filters that will filter out from known bad actors and known bad IPs that have a lot of filters. So make sure that's enabled. And I think that's probably pretty important because that's where the phishing attempts come into, or the phishing emails come in, is through your provider, your email provider.
Yeah. And what about software updates?
Software updates are always important. Like keep your own Windows or Mac machine updated. Make sure that you're applying the patches and updates to your own Windows system on a regular basis. Don't be one of those individuals that never updates their computer and it's got all sorts of security patches that have been sitting around for a year, maybe 100 patches. It's essentially you want to reboot your system at least once a week to apply the patches. So once a week would be minimal, I'd say. Some people like to reboot their machine every day. They turn it off at the end of the workday and they turn it back on in the morning. You can do it that way as well. But I would get in the habit of a regular update to keep your system protected from as many attack vectors as possible.
Yeah, definitely. And whether it's once a week, once every 2 weeks, from a compliance perspective, it's important to document what that is, right? Like how often do we perform software updates and check for them? Okay, and what about the overall culture within the organization?
Well, culture is important in terms of being security aware, and situational awareness is something that you should instill in your employees to, be aware of what's happening. Sometimes these social engineering attempts aren't through email. Sometimes a USB might be left in the parking lot by your car, so that when you look down, as you get in the car, you look down and you go, "What's this?" And you pick up this USB and you go, "I think when I take this home," yeah, you're curious. Are there photos on it? Is there a video on it? What's on this thing? Who knows, right? It's a mystery. So we are very curious creatures, and we want to go and plug it in. And as soon as you plug it in, you could have just infected your system. So be curious, but be cautious, right? If you're really that curious where you have to know what's on this USB, then grab an extra laptop, your old laptop that you don't use anymore, and make sure the Wi-Fi is turned off and isolated. And you don't care about that machine. It's probably going to trash the machine, but plug it in anyway, right? It's isolated. You could reinstall the entire operating system of that machine once it gets trashed. But if you are going to be that kind of a bounty hunter or a security sleuth, then you're going to have the right equipment. So I wouldn't recommend doing that. But be careful with our curiosity. That seems to be where these guys really can get you.
Most definitely. And bringing it back to HIPAA compliance, how is phishing regulated, or how is phishing handled under HIPAA compliance and current regulation if a phishing attack is successful?
Well, once a phishing attack occurs, then typically there's some data leakage, right? So if you have patient records that were potentially leaked or stolen, or even accessed by the by the bad actor, then you're going to have to follow HIPAA guidelines. And what do they call for? Well, they call for notifying those that were affected. That could be the patients themselves. You have to let them all know, hey, your records were exposed or they were handled by some malicious actor, and you're going to have to pay for the credit monitoring. That's typically the next step when there's been a unauthorized access of patient records. You have to pay for the credit monitoring, which can cost $20 per patient. If 100 patients got compromised, that's $2,000. So if you have cyber insurance, the price is a lot lower. The cyber insurance vendors, they're able to buy credit monitoring in bulk. So instead of spending $20 per credit report per hacked account, you can pay maybe $4 because the insurance, again, they buy this in bulk. So those are some of the repercussions, but these are now ugly repercussions, right? Now you're writing checks to vendors, you're spending a lot of money, maybe you're hiring an attorney. So you want to make sure not to get in that situation to begin with.
Yeah, so it's not just a technical problem, it's a legal and ethical one.
Yeah, it's all of that. And it's a headache.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Gil, this has been incredibly helpful. Thank you for sharing your expertise.
Yeah, you're welcome, Adam.
And to our listeners, remember, vigilance is key. Always examine links carefully before clicking, and don't hesitate to ask questions if you're unsure. You can reach out to us at podcast@HIPAAVault.com. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the HIPAA Insider Show. Stay safe, stay compliant.